Imagine a basement door, rusted shut for 16 years. When Union bayonets finally pry it open in 1864, 23 children blink up at the light. Every single one has their mistress's pale green eyes. And the oldest whispers a sentence that will haunt Georgia forever. We cannot leave, because we are her. The frost came early in February 1847. It came like judgment. A thin, cruel frost that killed the winter wheat in the ground and turned the red clay of Burke County, Georgia, the color of dried blood. The live oaks along the avenue to Thornhill Plantation stood naked, draped in black moss that swayed like widows' veils in the wind. And on the 7th day of that month, beneath a sky the shade of tarnished pewter, they lowered Jonathan Thornhill into the ground behind the little family chapel that hadn't seen a preacher in 8 years. Catherine Danforth Thornhill stood at the edge of the grave. 28 years old. Black bombazine dress buttoned to the throat, black veil hiding eyes the color of river ice after a thaw, green shot through with pale, unforgiving light. She did not cry. She had calculated long ago that tears were a luxury the living could not afford when the dead left mountains of debt behind them. Behind her, 31 enslaved souls stood in ragged silence. 11 men, 13 women, 7 children, the last remnants of what had once been a proud labor force. Their breath rose in white plumes. Their eyes stayed fixed on the raw red earth swallowing their master's pine box. And somewhere among them, a 16-year-old boy named Richard Thornhill, Jonathan's son by his first wife, watched his stepmother with a kind of hatred that has not yet decided whether it wants to kill or simply to understand. The will was read 2 days later in the cold parlor. Ambrose Talbert, the estate lawyer, smelled of camphor and bourbon even at 10 in the morning. He laid it out plainly. Total debt, $18,400, an ocean of money in 1847 Georgia. Cash on hand, $43. Cotton in the gin house, 14 bales of middling quality, already pledged to factors in Augusta. Mortgages due, 3, held by the Bank of Augusta and 2 private lenders who were known for foreclosing before the ink dried. Human property, the 31 souls standing outside, worth perhaps $15,000 on a good day in Charleston, but no buyer wanted workers from tired land and a dying plantation. Talbert closed the ledger with a sound like a coffin lid. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there are 2 paths. Sell everything, land, people, the silver, and you may clear enough to live quietly with your father in Augusta. Or hold on, and watch the creditors strip this house board by board." Catherine's voice was soft, almost musical. "Neither path interests me, Mr. Talbert." She dismissed him at the door with the same polite smile she once used on Savannah ballroom floors when she was the belle of the season, before marriage, before widowhood, before the arithmetic of survival replaced the arithmetic of flirtation. That night she did not sleep. She sat at the secretary in her bedroom, candlelight flickering across account books whose columns bled red. Outside, the wind scraped the shutters like something trying to get in. She was still beautiful. High cheekbones, skin like poured cream, auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight. Men had written bad poetry about that hair once. Now she twisted it into a severe knot and calculated children the way her husband had once calculated cotton bales. The idea came complete, perfect, monstrous, fully formed like Minerva from the head of Zeus. Not the casual breeding that happened on every plantation. Overseer winking at couplings, a little extra corn for every new baby. No. Something biblical in its scale. Something that would make the curse of Ham look like mercy. She would become the root. She would become the vine. Every worker on Thornhill soil would one day flow from her body, carry her blood, owe their breath to her choice. They would never be sold, because who would buy the mistress's own grandchildren? They would never run, because where could they run from their own marrow? They would serve, generation unto generation, world without end. Amen. She opened a fresh, leather-bound journal. On the flyleaf she wrote in her elegant, slanted hand. Cultivation records, Thornhill Estate. Commenced March 2nd, 1847. Then she began substituting words. Children became seedlings. Men became rootstock. Pregnancy became planting. Birth became harvest. Rape became nothing at all. Some things, apparently, needed no euphemism because they had become, in her mind, mere agricultural acts. She selected the first rootstock with the care a gardener gives prize roses. Name: Isaac. Age: 24. Born on the plantation, son of Big Hannah and the blacksmith who'd been sold south in 43. 6 feet 2 inches tall, shoulders broad as an ox yoke, skin the color of polished mahogany, eyes a clear amber that caught torchlight like a cat's. He could plow a 10-acre field before the sun reached noon and never complain. More importantly, he never looked at her with hatred. Only with the careful, measuring emptiness that very strong men learn when they have no other weapon. On the evening of March 9, 1847, she sent the housegirl Delphine with a message. Mistress wants Isaac in the library. Now. Isaac came barefoot across the cold bricks of the back gallery, shirt damp with sweat from the cookhouse fire. The house was silent except for the ticking of the tall case clock in the hall. Tick, 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 like a heart that refused to die. Catherine waited behind the desk, candlelight gilding the edges of her hair where it had escaped its pins. She did not waste words. You will do exactly what I tell you. If you ever speak of this night to another soul, I will sell your mother and your little sister Ruth to the first trader who rides through Waynesboro. They will go to Texas. You know what happens to pretty 12-year-old girls in Texas. Isaac's face did not change, but something behind the amber eyes went very far away. She locked the library door. She drew the green velvet curtains. She laid the key on the desk like a wager. What happened next took less than 20 minutes. When it was over, she straightened her skirts, smoothed her hair, and said in the same tone she might use ordering coffee. You will return 4 nights from now. And 4 nights after that. Until I tell you otherwise. Isaac dressed in silence. At the door he paused, just for a breath, and looked back at her. For one dangerous second something flared in his face. Not hate, not yet, but recognition. 2 human beings measuring the exact distance across which one had just declared war on the other's soul. Then he was gone, barefoot across the cold bricks again, disappearing into the dark toward the quarters where the dogs slept and the night insects sang of old sins. 3 weeks later she knew. The familiar heaviness in her breasts, the metallic taste at the back of the throat, the way the smell of coffee suddenly turned her stomach. She wrote in the journal. First planting successful. Rootstock number 1. Anticipated harvest, 10 to 15 December 1847. Proceeding to second planting with rootstock number 2, Jupiter, age 21, carriage driver, excellent bone structure, next lunar cycle. She was, in her own mind, merely rational. A woman alone, preserving an estate, preserving a way of life. She did not hear the distant thunder that rolled over the pine barrens every evening that spring, as if God himself were clearing his throat. Richard noticed the change in his stepmother first by what was missing. She no longer rode out at dawn on her gray mare, inspecting the fields. She no longer scolded the cook about waste. She moved through the house like a woman underwater, slow, deliberate, listening to something the rest of them could not hear. He was 16, all elbows and resentment, still mourning a father who had never truly been his friend. He hated Catherine with the pure, bright hatred only adolescence can manufacture. But hatred sharpens observation. In late May he found the library door locked 3 evenings in a row. He heard footsteps on the back stair after midnight, bare feet, and the softer pad of a woman's slippers. He began counting. On June 3rd he hid behind the dusty brocade curtains in the upstairs hallway and watched Isaac leave his stepmother's room just before dawn. The man moved like someone carrying an invisible yoke that had just been riveted around his neck forever. Richard vomited in the chamber pot when he understood. He confronted her that same afternoon in the garden, where she sat shelling peas with Delphine, the only house servant still allowed near her now that her waist had begun to thicken. "You're carrying a child," he said without greeting. "And it isn't my father's." For a moment the only sound was the soft pop of peas leaving their pods. Catherine did not look up. "Your father was a dying man for weeks, Richard. But he was still a man. Do you truly wish to slander the dead? You dismissed your maid. You locked your door. You bring that field hand into the house after dark." Her hands never stopped moving. Green pods split open like secrets. "Careful, boy," she said softly. "Some accusations, once spoken, can never be taken back. And they have a way of turning on the accuser." She lifted her eyes then, those pale river ice eyes, and Richard felt something inside his chest shrivel. That night he began picking the lock on her desk. It took him 3 nights with a bent hairpin and prayers he no longer believed in. When the drawer slid open, the leather journal lay on top like a sleeping adder. He carried it to his room, heart hammering so loudly he was sure the whole house could hear. By candlelight he deciphered the cipher, simple but clever, substituting farm words for human ones. It took him until the roosters crowed. When he understood the full scope, the charts, the projected generations, the cold columns of numbers marching down the page like soldiers, he sat on the floor and wept without sound, the way frightened children do when they realize monsters are real and wear perfume and speak French. He made copies. He hid them between the pages of a Latin grammar no one ever opened. And then, on a humid evening in early August, he made his first mistake. He left one sheet, a single decoded page, on the desk when he heard her footsteps in the hall. She found it, of course. Dinner that night was catfish and okra. The dining room smelled of tallow candles and fear. Catherine passed him the cornbread with a smile gentle as a lullaby. "Richard," she said conversationally, "do you ever think about Cain and Abel?" He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "How one brother's blood cried out from the ground," she continued, buttering her bread with delicate strokes, "and God heard it. But sometimes the ground drinks the blood and stays silent. Because the wrong brother was the one who spilled it." She looked at him then, and for the first time he saw something behind the ice, something ancient and amused, like a snake that has learned to wear a woman's face. 2 weeks later the headaches began. Then the stomach cramps that doubled him over in the night. Then the strange metallic taste that coated his tongue no matter how much water he drank. Catherine nursed him herself. She brewed willowbark tea with her own hands. She spooned beef tea between his lips when he was too weak to sit up. She read to him from the book of Job in a voice as soothing as laudanum. "Behold," she whispered one night as thunder rolled far off over the Ogeechee, "I am of small account. What shall I answer thee?" Richard tried to scream, but his throat was raw from vomiting. He managed only a croak that sounded like poison. Catherine smiled and stroked the hair back from his fevered forehead. "Hush now, darling," she said. "Everything is proceeding exactly according to plan." Outside, the Georgia night pressed against the windows like a living thing. Hot, wet, full of cicadas screaming the same note over and over, the way damned souls must scream when they finally understand the nature of eternity. And in the quarters, Isaac stood at the door of his cabin and stared toward the big house where a single candle still burned on the 2nd floor. He touched the place on his chest where something had been carved out of him that could never be replaced. He whispered a single word into the darkness, half curse, half prayer. The word was her name, Catherine. The letter took Richard 3 nights to write. His hand shook so badly the ink spidered across the page like black veins. He wrote it crouched beside the dying fire in his bedroom, December wind howling down the chimney, tasting of pine smoke and death. He told his grandfather everything. The cipher, the rootstock, the arsenic that now lived in his bones like frost. He begged for soldiers, for sheriffs, for anyone who still believed in God. When it was finished he sealed it with candle wax the color of dried blood and pressed his father's signet ring into the blob. His last legal claim to the name Thornhill. Pearl was 14, small for her age, eyes already old. She took the letter with fingers that trembled against his burning skin. "I'll ride to town tomorrow, Mr. Richard. I swear on Jesus." He believed her. Children believe in oaths the way drowning men believe in ropes. Pearl delivered the letter straight into Catherine's white hands before the sun was fully up. Catherine read it in the winter parlor while the grandfather clock struck 8 slow notes, each one a nail in a coffin. She read it without blinking. Then she carried it upstairs herself. Richard lay propped against pillows, cheekbones sharp as broken glass beneath translucent skin. He had not left his bed in 9 days. Catherine sat on the edge of the mattress the way a spider settles on a web. She held the letter above the hearth until the flames licked it black, until the last curl of ash carried his words up the chimney and into the cold Georgia sky. "You poor darling," she whispered, cupping his burning cheek. "Fever dreams. Such terrible dreams." Richard tried to speak. Only a rattle came out, like dry leaves in a box. "Shh." She pressed a finger to his cracked lips. "Everything ends tonight." She spooned something thick and bitter between his teeth, laudanum laced with one final, merciful dose of arsenic. He swallowed because he no longer had the strength to turn away. At 3:17 a.m. on December 3, 1847, Richard Thornhill died with his stepmother's hand stroking his hair and the taste of poison on his tongue. Outside, the frost painted the window panes with white ferns that looked, from the bed, like wings. Dr. Pritchard signed the certificate without ever looking closely at the body. "Acute consumption," he wrote, pocketing Catherine's quiet envelope of gold coins. "Boys waste quickly in the damp air," he told the 2 neighbors who served as witnesses. They buried Richard beside his father 4 days later. Catherine wept with perfect decorum, 3 tears, no more, her black veil fluttering like a mourning flag. That same night her water broke. Jonathan Danforth Thornhill, named for the husband who had never touched her in the final year of his life, was born just after dawn on December 19, 1847. 8 pounds, 11 ounces. Auburn fuzz on his scalp, pale green eyes already open and measuring the world with his mother's cold calculation. Miriam Grayson cut the cord, wrapped the baby in linen finer than any child in the quarters had ever touched, and laid him in Catherine's arms. "Strong lungs," the midwife said. "And your eyes, ma'am. Lord have mercy, he has your eyes." Catherine smiled down at the child who was also her property. "Yes," she murmured. "He does." She registered him as Mulatto Boy Johnny, born to house wench Delphine. A small lie to keep the county clerk from counting months. Then she opened the cultivation journal and wrote in her neat, lethal hand. "Harvest number 1 successful. Rootstock number 1, Isaac. Excellent vigor, desirable pigmentation ratio 3:1. Seedling exhibit superior cranial proportion." Proceeding to rootstock number 2 immediately. The years that followed were quiet on the surface and thunderous underneath. Cotton blossomed white as bone across the red fields. Debts shrank like snow in spring. Visitors who rode up the Oak Avenue saw only a handsome widow in black, later gray, later lavender, managing her late husband's estate with a firm, pious hand. They did not see what happened after the sun dropped behind the pines. They did not see Miriam Grayson brew tansy and pennyroyal tea in the stillroom until it steamed green and evil, then force it down the throats of women whose bellies dared to round without permission. They did not hear Ruth, sweet Ruth who had once sung hymns while she scrubbed floors, scream into a rag while 2 men held her legs apart and Miriam Grayson's hook scraped life from her womb because the child inside belonged to the wrong father. Ruth bled for 9 days. On the 10th she went back to the field, eyes empty as spent shotgun shells. She died in the fever summer of 1853, whispering Samuel's name with her last breath, though Samuel had been sold south for looking at her too long. They did not see Thomas take 39 lashes because he dared say no when Catherine summoned him in 1855. The whip sang. His skin opened like red curtains. Afterward Virgil Kane dragged him half-conscious to the big house and chained his ankle to the bedpost so he could not run again. Hannah, Thomas's wife, carried their own child to term that same winter. She named the baby Mercy and kissed its soft forehead every night, praying the mistress would never notice how much the child looked like its father. Mercy was sold at age 6 to pay a tax levy. Hannah never screamed. She simply stopped eating. One morning they found her cold in the corner of the cabin, arms wrapped around emptiness. By 1856 the big house echoed with small footsteps that should never have been there. 10 children now, 10 seedlings, ranging from baby Caroline in her cradle to 8-year-old Jonathan who already stood at his mother's shoulder when she wrote in the journals. They wore clean calico and ate from the same table as the mistress. They called her ma'am, or, in private moments she allowed no one else to witness, mother. They learned their letters by candlelight, tracing Catherine's elegant copperplate while outside the wind carried the low singing of the quarters, spirituals that sounded like mourning even when the words spoke of glory. Catherine taught them carefully chosen verses. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. She would stroke Jonathan's auburn hair as she said it. "Do you understand, darling? Some blood is set apart. Some blood must be kept pure." Jonathan would nod, green eyes solemn. He understood nothing except that he was special, and that special hurt in ways he could not yet name. At night the children sometimes heard crying from the quarters. They learned not to ask questions. Questions made mother's mouth go thin as a scar. In 1858 Catherine ordered the east wing sealed. Carpenters, hired from Augusta and paid triple to keep silent, bricked up 2 windows and hung a new door with an iron lock only she possessed. She called it the Heritage Room. Inside, no windows, only lamplight the color of old bones. Shelves of journals, 5 volumes now, bound in black leather. Rows of tiny glass vials, each holding a soft curl tied with red thread. Jonathan, Ellalinina, Abigail, Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, and more coming. In the center stood a walnut table scarred from years of ink. On it, the great chart. Drawn in India ink and Catherine's own blood, 1 drop pricked from her thumb on the day she began it, the tree spread like a nightmare. Her name at the root. 10 branches already bearing fruit. Lines reaching forward. Pairings planned for 1865, 1870, 1875. Jonathan to be paired with Ruth's surviving niece, Lydia, when she reached 14. Ellalinina with Thomas's eldest boy, Jacob. Abigail with a new rootstock yet to be selected. Notes in the margins in Catherine's spider-fine hand. Prevent excessive consanguinity in first generation. Introduce fresh stock as needed. Monitor for mandibular strength, ocular clarity, docility index. She spent hours there alone, door locked, lamp turned low, tracing the lines with 1 pale finger as if stroking the throats of children who were not yet born. Sometimes she spoke aloud to the silent room. "They will never leave me. They will water this ground with their children's children until the stars burn out. I am making a family that cannot be broken because it is already shattered and remade in my image." The walls drank her words and gave nothing back. In the quarters they began to call the big house Golconda, after the diamond mines where slaves were said to live underground forever. Mothers warned their daughters. "Mind your eyes, child. If they too green, she take you for the big house." Fathers taught their sons to walk with shoulders rounded, to hide strength, to cough when the mistress passed so she would not choose them for rootstock. Prayers changed. Where once they had begged for freedom, now they begged for barren wombs. "Laud, let me not quicken. Let no child of mine carry her blood and wear her chain." But God, if he listened, kept his own counsel. By 1860, the plantation looked prosperous to any traveler who rode the long avenue beneath the moss-draped oaks. Whitewash fresh, gin house humming, fields rolling green to the horizon. The census taker that year wrote, "Thornhill Estate, Mrs. K. Thornhill, proprietor. 68 souls, including 28 children under 10. 4,200 bales cotton expected. Estate value, $42,000 and rising." He never saw the Heritage Room. He never saw the scars on Thomas's back or the hollow place where Violet's eyes used to shine before her daughter Sarah bled out at 15, giving Catherine another strong-backed boy for the fields. He never heard the soft click of the lock when Catherine entered the east wing at midnight, lamp in hand, to add another name to the tree. And he never felt the Georgia ground itself, red as rust, rich with old blood, shudder faintly beneath his boots as if something down deep had finally decided it had carried enough. Change was riding north with blue uniforms and south with gray. Sherman's name was still just a rumor on the wind. But in the quarters they began to sing a new verse, low and careful, only when the overseer was drunk. "Before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave, and go home to my Lord and be free." Catherine heard it one Sunday evening carried on the hot wind while she rocked on the gallery with baby Caroline asleep against her breast. She smiled, small and cold. Let them sing, she thought. Songs cannot break blood. She did not yet understand that blood, once spilled in the right pattern, has a voice of its own. And it was already learning how to scream. The winter of 1862 tasted of gunsmoke carried all the way from Tennessee. It drifted down the Savannah River, settled in the lungs of Burke County like a warning, and still Catherine Thornhill believed she could outrun the war the way she had outrun everything else, by tightening the chains one more link. She forbade anyone to leave the plantation, not to visit kin, not to trade at the crossroads, not even to bury the dead on neighboring land. She doubled the night patrols. She doled out extra corn and fatback with the smile of a woman buying silence with crumbs. And in the big house, behind locked doors, she began marrying her own children. Jonathan turned 15 on a December night so cold the well water froze in the bucket. Catherine dressed him in his father's old frock coat, cut down at the cuffs, smelling still of camphor and the grave, and told him it was time to become a man. Rachel was brought up from the quarters at dusk. 16 years old. Skin the color of river clay after rain. Eyes that had already seen too much and now stared at nothing. Catherine performed the ceremony herself in the cold parlor. No preacher. No ring. Only a Bible open to Genesis 2 verse 24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife. Read in a voice as flat and sharp as a skinning knife. Jonathan repeated the words because he had been taught that obedience was love. Rachel repeated the words because the overseer's hand rested on the butt of his pistol. Afterward Catherine gave them the east bedroom on the second floor, the one with the heavy oak door that locked from the outside. She kissed Jonathan's forehead, tasting salt and terror. "Give me strong grandsons," she whispered. "The estate depends on it." That night the wind screamed around the eaves like every woman who had ever bled on Thornhill soil. Rachel lay beneath the son of her mistress and stared at the ceiling where moonlight painted bars across the plaster. She thought of her mother in the quarters, of the river she had never seen, of the child that would be born into chains because 2 children had been told this was marriage. 9 months later she birthed a boy with Jonathan's auburn hair and Catherine's pale green eyes. Catherine named him Isaiah, Salvation of the Lord, and registered him as property the same day. The second wedding was scheduled for spring, the third for autumn. But something was rotting at the root. It began with Ella. She was 14 now, tall, thin, all angles and questions. Catherine had always called her, my clever girl, the way a spider praises the fly that builds the strongest strand. In May 1863, while the guns at Chancellorsville still echoed in newspaper headlines, Ella was sent to dust the study. A leather journal lay open on the desk, Volume 4, left carelessly because Catherine had begun to believe her secrets were immortal. Ella read 1 page. Then another. Then she carried the book to the window where the light was better and read until her knees gave out. Rootstock number 2, Thomas, field hand, age 21 at planting. Second planting, January 18, 1848. Weather, unseasonably warm, jasmine blooming early. Seedling female, harvest October 28, 1848. Eyes, green inheriting dominant. Disposition, observant, strong-willed, monitor closely. Planned pairing 1865 with Marcus, Isaac line, to reinforce loyalty traits. She read her own conception like a butcher's invoice. She read the chart that connected her name to a boy not yet born. She read the marginal note in her mother's hand. Prevent emotional attachment, early separation if necessary. When Catherine found her, Ella was on the floor vomiting bile and fury. The confrontation came after supper. Ella stood in the doorway of the heritage room, door ajar for the first time in her memory, and spoke the words that could never be unsaid. "You are my mother. Thomas is my father. And you mean to breed me like a prize sow." Catherine closed the door with the soft click of a trap. The lamp between them painted their faces the color of old blood. "Sit," she said. Ella did not sit. Catherine's voice dropped to the register she used when breaking horses. "You have always been mine, body, breath, and future. I carried you beneath my heart. I own the heart that beats inside you. Do you think the accident of birth changes that?" Ella laughed, a sound like glass dragged across stone. "You carried me the way a wolf carries a lamb, until it's large enough to eat." Catherine stepped close enough that Ella could smell bergamot and arsenic on her breath. "Listen carefully, daughter. Outside these walls there is a war that is eating the world. Men are dying in mud thicker than Georgia clay. If you force my hand, I will sell you tomorrow to the first trader riding north from Savannah. You will learn what real suffering tastes like. Here, you are cherished. Here, you are necessary. Choose.
Elena chose silence.
But silence is not surrender. She began with Jonathan. She found him in the library, tracing Latin conjugations with a finger that still had Rachel's blood under the nail from helping at the birth. She told him everything. He listened with the same polite attention he gave to Bible verses, then said, "Mother saved us, Ella. Without her we would have been born in the quarters. We would have been nothing. We are nothing," she hissed. "We are her livestock with better manners." Jonathan only shook his head the way Catherine had taught him. Slow, sad, certain. Abigail understood at once. 13 years old and already sharper than most adults. She read the decoded pages Elalina slipped under her pillow and wept without sound for 3 nights. Margaret, 12, understood enough to start having nightmares in which green-eyed babies clawed their way out of her belly while Catherine took notes. The younger ones were still too small. But the house, once a place of soft voices and candlelight lessons, now carried the stench of secrets the way a slaughterhouse carries blood. Catherine felt it. She saw it in the way Jonathan's hand trembled when he passed the butter. In the way Abigail's eyes followed her like a cat watching a snake. She decided a demonstration was required. Grace ran on the night of August 14, 1863. 17 years old, 5 months heavy with the child of a man twice her age, she slipped out of the quarters with nothing but the dress on her back and a name, Freedom, whispered so often it had become prayer. They caught her at dawn, hip-deep in black water swamp, mosquitoes whining hymns around her face. Catherine assembled every soul on the plantation the next morning. Even the nursing mothers. Even the children who could barely walk. She stood on the gallery in morning black though no one had died, yet, and spoke as if reading from Leviticus. This woman tried to murder the future. She tried to steal from every one of you the family we are building. Watch. Old Kendrick, 68, hands shaking with ague, laid 20 lashes across Grace's back while she was tied to the whipping post that hadn't been used since Virgil Cain died at Shiloh. The leather cracked. Grace did not scream after the 3rd stroke. She had learned the uselessness of sound. Catherine made her own children stand on the lowest step so the blood spattered their shoes. When it was over, she smiled the small, tidy smile she used when the cotton made weight. Let this be a lesson in gratitude. But lessons are dangerous things. Sometimes the student learns the wrong part. In the quarters that night, the women washed Grace's back with salt water and soft rage. Hope, the conjure woman who had buried 3 husbands and 4 children, pressed a cool rag to the wounds and whispered, "She's scared, y'all. First time I ever seen that woman scared." Elalina heard the whispers. She began slipping out after midnight, barefoot across the dew-wet grass, to sit at the edge of the quarters where the pine torches burned low. She learned her father Thomas had been sold for looking at her too long when she was 4. She learned Rachel rocked her baby to sleep singing the songs her own mother had sung before Catherine sold her. She learned that every woman there carried a scar, some on the body, all on the soul, put there by the woman who had rocked Elalina herself to sleep. One October night the women met in the woods where the hoot owl calls hid their voices. Hope passed a gourd of water and spoke plain. Your mama think blood make you hers forever. But blood just make you family. And family can kill what needs killing. Anna, barely 15, asked the question that burned in every throat. When? Elalina answered before she knew the words were coming. When the Yankees come close enough to hear us scream. They scattered at the sound of a twig, Kendrick's dog, or maybe just the wind. No one was caught. But the idea had taken root deeper than any cotton Catherine ever planted. Through the terrible winter of 1863–64, the war crawled closer. Sherman was in Tennessee. Then in Mississippi. Then, God have mercy, in Georgia itself. Confederate cavalry clattered up the avenue in March 1864, ragged and hungry, demanding corn and horses and the last of the smoked hams. They camped one night in the lower pasture, fires winking like fallen stars. Around those fires they spoke openly because they believed no one was listening. Atlanta's gonna fall by summer, one said. gnawing a stolen sweet potato. Sherman's burning everything that can't run. Another laughed, bitter as gall. Let him come. Ain't much left to burn. Every enslaved soul at Thornhill heard it. They heard it and felt something inside their chests crack open like sunrise. Hope spread faster than smallpox. In the big house, Catherine paced the heritage room at 3 a.m., lamp trembling in her hand, staring at the great blood-ink tree that was supposed to last 1,000 years. She added a new note in the margin beside Ellalenina's name, handwriting shaking for the first time in 17 years. Subject increasingly intractable. Consider disposal if control cannot be reasserted before harvest 1865. She did not hear the soft footsteps in the hallway outside. Bare feet, for sets, pausing at the locked door the way wolves pause when they finally catch the scent of fear. She did not hear the quarters singing under their breath, a new verse added to the old spiritual. No more mistress, no more whip, no more children born to weep. She did not hear the earth itself, red, rich, patient, begin to shift beneath the foundations of Thornhill Plantation, loosening its grip on the bones it had kept so long. But the children heard. The children always hear first. And somewhere in the dark between the big house and the quarters, Ellalenina stood with her bare feet in the cold March mud and felt the ground answer back, steady and ancient and hungry. Soon, it whispered. Soon. March 17, 1864. The air smelled of gunpowder and dogwood blossoms, two things that should never meet. Catherine Thornhill had not slept in 4 nights. She moved through the big house like a ghost who still believed she owned the haunting. Candle in one hand, pistol in the other, eyes wide and shining with the bright, brittle madness of a woman who has finally seen the edge of her world and decided to burn it rather than let it fall. She gathered them at midnight. 11 children, her children, stood in the cold parlor in their nightgowns, barefoot on the heart pine floor that had once belonged to a husband who never suspected what his widow would do with his name. Jonathan, 16, shoulders already stooped with the weight of things he had been forced to do in the marriage bed. Ellalenina, 15, chin high, eyes burning with the knowledge that had cost her innocence. Abigail, 14, clutching Margaret's hand so tightly the younger girl whimpered. Samuel, William, Henry, little Caroline, down to 6-month-old Ruth who slept in Abigail's arms, unaware she had been born to be bred. Catherine's voice was soft, almost loving. The Yankees are coming. They will tear you from me. They will scatter you like seed on barren ground. You will be neither white nor black, neither slave nor free. You will be nothing. I will not allow that. Ellalenina stepped forward. You would rather we be corpses than free? Catherine smiled the way winter smiles at a dying fire. Corpses belong to their maker. She led them down the east wing corridor, past the locked door that had swallowed so many midnights, into the heritage room that smelled of ink, camphor, and old blood. She lit every lamp until the walls blazed with the horror she had authored. Shelves of black journals. Rows of tiny vials glinting like captured souls. The great tree, her tree, sprawled across parchment in crimson and black, every branch a child, every leaf a future rape. She opened the walnut cabinet and took out the box. Inside, 6 brown glass bottles, each labeled in her perfect copperplate. Laudanum. Enough for 11 small bodies and one woman who had decided heaven and hell were both preferable to defeat. She set the bottles on the table like communion cups. Drink, she said gently. And we will sleep together until the world forgets us. Abigail began to cry. Soft, hiccuping sobs that sounded like small animals dying. Jonathan moved first. He placed himself between his mother and his siblings the way a soldier steps in front of a firing squad. No. The single word cracked across the room like the first rifle shot at Fort Sumter. Catherine's face twisted. Love, rage, grief, triumph all fighting for space. Jonathan, my perfect boy. You understand. You have always understood. I understand you forced me to lie with Rachel when I was 15. I understand the child she bore is both my son and my brother. I understand you are damned, and you want to drag us into the fire with you. He picked up one of the bottles and hurled it against the wall. Brown glass exploded. The smell of poppy and alcohol filled the room like incense at a black mass. The younger children screamed. Catherine lunged for the pistol inside her apron pocket. Elalina was faster. She caught her mother's wrist, fingers digging into the thin bones. "You will not murder us tonight." For one heartbeat the two women, mother and daughter, creator and creation, stared into each other's pale green eyes and saw the same abyss looking back. Then Catherine wrenched free, snatched 3 journals and the box of vials, and ran. She ran like a woman possessed, nightgown flapping, bare feet bleeding on the brick path, clutching her legacy to her breast the way Mary once clutched the body of her son. Behind her, 11 children spilled out of the big house screaming into the night. The quarters woke to the sound of white feet running toward them for the first time in 17 years. Hope was already in the yard, shawl clutched around her shoulders, eyes reflecting torchlight like a wolf's. She saw the mistress coming, hair wild, face luminous with madness, arms full of the books that had measured their wombs and mapped their pain. And Hope smiled. Catherine stumbled to a stop 10 feet from the first cabin. She raised the pistol with shaking hands. "Stay back. These records will survive. The world will know what I built." Hope took 1 step forward. "What you built, mistress, was a grave with 11 names on it. Tonight the grave takes you instead." Someone behind Hope, Thomas, maybe, or Anna, or every soul who had ever bled at Thornhill, moved. The pistol roared. The bullet buried itself in the dirt at Hope's feet. Then the night folded in on Catherine Thornhill like the jaws of something ancient and patient. No one ever spoke the details aloud. Some said Thomas took the pistol but to the base of her skull and kept swinging long after the sound stopped being human. Some said the women dragged her by the hair to the old dry well behind the smokehouse, the one that had been capped since the cholera summer of '53, and dropped her screaming into the dark. Some said Hope herself whispered a single word into Catherine's ear before the earth closed over her. "Remember me." The journals were torn apart page by page and fed to the cook fire. The vials were smashed beneath bare heels, locks of auburn and black hair scattered across the dirt like the ashes of dead stars. By the time Jonathan and Elalina reached the quarters, there was nothing left but smoke, silence, and the smell of gunpowder and wet clay. Jonathan fell to his knees. "Where is she?" Hope looked down at him, 16 years old and already carrying the weight of centuries. "She gone, child. Gone where every debt gets paid in full." Elalina stood beside her brother, tears cutting clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. "Let her stay gone." And the people who had survived Catherine Thornhill closed ranks like a congregation after communion and chose, for the first and only time in their lives, to protect a secret instead of being destroyed by one. Dawn came red over the fields. Old Kendrick found the yard empty, the big house echoing, the mistress vanished. He rode to Waynesboro and told the sheriff a tidy lie about Yankees and panic and a woman fleeing north. No one asked questions. The war was ending, the world was on fire. One missing white woman was hardly worth a posse. 14 months later, blue-coated soldiers finally came down the long avenue under a flag of truce. Captain Samuel Reynolds, 34th Massachusetts, walked into the rotting mansion expecting rebel guerrillas and found instead 23 children blinking up from the cellar where Catherine had hidden them when rumors grew too loud. They ranged from 4 to nearly grown, all with high cheekbones, all with eyes the color of river ice after thaw, all with auburn hair threaded with gold. When the soldiers asked their names, the eldest, a girl of 13 with Elalina's mouth and Jonathan's wary stare, answered in a voice like a prayer and a curse. "We are the legacy. But the legacy is over." Reynolds fed them hardtack and salt pork, wrapped them in blankets that smelled of campfire smoke, and wrote in his private journal that night words he never thought a New England man would write. "I have seen the abomination that justified every bullet we ever fired. Whatever happened to the woman who did this, I sleep easier knowing she will never draw breath again." He ordered the cellar sealed, the house burned for sanitation, and the children scattered to freedmen's camps and kind-hearted farm wives who asked no questions. The war ended. The chains fell. Most left Thornhill the way people leave a graveyard at dusk, quickly, quietly, looking back only once. Hope stayed long enough to plant a cedar tree where the well had been. Thomas stayed long enough to teach Elalina how to hold a plow without flinching at the weight of memory. Then they, too, walked away. The big house burned in '71. Some said lightning, some said justice finally found a match. The land was cut up, sold for taxes, forgotten by every map. But the story was never forgotten. It lived in the hush that fell when old folks spoke of the place out by Briar Creek. It lived in the way certain families in Burke County still flinch at pale green eyes. It lived in the dreams of descendants who wake with the taste of iron in their mouths and no idea why. And sometimes, when the moon is thin and the wind moves just right through the second growth pines, people walking Old Waynesboro Road swear they hear it. A woman screaming as she falls. 11 children crying at the edge of a well. And underneath it all, the low, satisfied sound of Georgia Clay swallowing a debt that was 17 years overdue. Catherine Thornhill wanted a legacy that would outlast empires. She got one. Not the dynasty she planned, but a warning carved into the marrow of a nation. Some blood is poison. Some earth refuses to grow anything watered by it. And some mothers discover, too late, that the children they tried to own are the only judges they will ever face. The cedar tree hope planted still stands. It has never borne fruit. And beneath its roots, 30 feet down in the cool, blind dark, something wearing a rotted bombazine dress keeps Catherine Thornhill company forever. She is not alone. She never was. The children made sure of that. Fade to black. Single line of text on screen. Some debts are paid in silence. Some graves never give up their dead. Thank you for walking this far into the dark with me.